This video is intended to provide you with an overview and some general information with respect to the PEAC process for Salvation Army officers in the Canada and Bermuda Territory. For many of you, this will simply be a refresher, as you have already worked through this process. The video is in 3 parts: an initial overview of the process, followed by a more detailed description of how to use the Performance Development Conversation Worksheet, and finally, instructions on how to complete the PEAC Officer Development Review Form. The process is intended to be developmental in nature and designed to ensure that there is input from both individuals involved in the process. It is meant to be collaborative, and the result should align individual goals with those of the organization. The first step in the process involves both the supervisor and the officer using the Performance Development Conversation Worksheet to highlight strengths and areas of development. During the next phase of the process, participants meet to share what they have created and collaborate to come to an understanding of 2 or 3 appropriate goals. This collaborative work is then entered onto the PEAC Officer Development Review Form. It's expected that officers be reviewed on a 2-year cycle after confirmation, unless otherwise determined. Officers in their first 5 years should expect a yearly PEAC prior to their confirmation. The Performance Development Conversation and Worksheet. This document provides an overview of the officer characteristics and competencies that are important to all officers of the Salvation Army, as well as leadership capabilities as defined by leads. It's our hope that the use of this document will allow both the officer going through the PEAC process and the supervisor to consider individual goals as well as goals of the organization. The performance conversation is driven by both individuals involved in the process, independently using highlighters and the separate worksheets to indicate areas of strength as well as areas of development. The process outlined in the next section for the individual completing a self-assessment is also completed by the supervising participant. I'm going to suggest that you make use of highlighters as you complete the worksheet for the performance development conversation. I'm going to suggest that you use a couple of colors because this will help you have a look at some of your strengths as well as some of the areas for growth. I'm going to in fact use a green highlighter to pick out one area in each of the sections to indicate areas where I see myself as being strong, or if I was the supervising individual, where I see the participant as being strong. For example, I'm going to simply take the highlighter and check the section which says, has a teachable spirit, is genuine, and demonstrates a consistent desire to grow and learn. That's something I think I'm good at, and I'm going to put that green highlight marker through that. I've chosen this from the spiritual maturity section, and I'm going to leave the rest of the section and move on to sense of vocation. I'm going to check off demonstrates a spirit of sacrifice, and then move into the salvationism section. It is not essential that you pick something from every section. In fact, I would suggest that there would be areas where they are things you've taken care of or things that aren't at the forefront of your ministry currently, and therefore you just might move on from. In the same way in which I used a green highlighter to indicate areas of strength, I'm going to use a yellow highlighter to pick areas that I see as growth opportunities for me during the next performance cycle. I'm going to check this box here under Salvationism, actively encourages and participates in local initiatives for officer recruitment, as I know that there are a couple of young individuals at my particular ministry unit that could use the support, and it's something that I know would be a good goal and would be appreciated not only by my supervisor but by the territory as a whole. I'm going to continue that throughout this section of officer characteristics and competencies. I'm going to continue with the worksheet and now look at the leads capability framework and those areas of leadership that I see as strengths and as areas of potential growth. Again, I'm going to just pick one item in each section, highlight it. I'm going to continue highlighting one strength from each area in the leads capability section. And in some cases, I might actually pick 2 in the same section while ignoring another section. There's nothing wrong with highlighting a particular area of strength while ignoring another. I would recommend that you try as best as possible to pick something from each section. Now, just like I did with the officer characteristics section, I'm going to go back and I'm going to select an area for growth in one of these sections. Move to the next section, pick something from there, and something from this section as well. Now, while I'm not taking much time to go through this process, I would anticipate that you'll put a little more thought into thinking about the areas of both strength and growth. I would say, however, that you really need to go with initial reactions, and this whole process would probably take somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 45 minutes to complete. This should provide you with more than enough information to carry out your developmental conversation. This conversation is perhaps the most important part of the process and is intended to allow both the officer and the supervisor to share their previous work and eventually settle on agreed upon areas of growth. Please remember that the worksheets are not intended to be part of a permanent officer file, but they might be kept in the same way that notes would be kept from a meeting of this nature. During this time together, it's important to consider not only which goals are appropriate for this stage of the officer's career, but also which goals might be best suited to the current appointment. The review form is a fillable form and is much shorter in length than the previous PEAC form. Page 1, Section A, requires a summary of officer strengths from both the Officer Characteristics Competencies section as well as the Leadership Capabilities section of the worksheet. There's only space for 3 strengths from each section, even though we acknowledge that there could be many more from each category. Page 2, Section B, seeks up to 3 areas of development from each of the same sections. This process should allow for additional conversation concerning appropriate goals at this point in time. There is room to capture some of this conversation in the comments section of the form. Section C on page 2 will summarize your discussion and records not only the agreed upon goals, but also some of the specifics concerning next steps and potential milestones. Section D is simply a sign-off to be used once the form is completed. It is our intention to have this eventually in a live format that will be stored electronically. This should provide you with more than enough information to carry out your developmental conversation. Once this process has been completed, the signed PEAC form should be submitted to the divisional commander or department head, who will then follow the process as outlined by the Officer Personnel Department.